How's it going, guys? My name is Dom, and today I'll be showing you how to create your very own pin input using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this right here is what we're going to be building today. As you can see, the user can enter in a pin, then press enter, and you can do whatever you want with the given pin. I've chosen to console log the value, but you may wish to send it to an API or to the next page, whatever it might be. You should be able to achieve it using this pin input because it's quite a generic solution. This is in contrast to a video I made a few years ago, which is focused on a pin login screen. So this one here is also going to be a simpler solution. So that's good. You can also do things like clear out the input just like this, and there we go. Now we're going to be beginning from scratch in this tab right here, and we are going to be using the Ionicons icon library. I'm going to be leaving this linked down below. This library is going to give us that clear button and the next or submit button icons. Okay, so you want to go inside here, linked down below, and simply copy the two script tags and paste it in the bottom of your HTML, just like this, you know, at the end of the body. Right? And now we have the icons installed. You can also see that I've got a linked CSS style sheet containing only these two CSS properties, a margin and a background, and also a main.js file, which is currently empty. I'm also using a type of module inside the head, which ensures that my script supports modules if you want to use modules, but more importantly, whatever's inside here is going to run after the document is loaded. Okay, fantastic. So once you have this set up right here, we can move on to the HTML. So when it comes to the structure for the pin input, we're going to be beginning with a div with a class of pin-screen, pin input, pin screen, same sort of terminal or same intention, different terminology. Okay. Now inside here, we're going to have a few things. We're going to have an input field with a type of password. So we'll say here type of password and a class of pin-value. It is going to hold the value for the pin input. Okay. Down here, we can also make a new horizontal rule with a class of pin divider. This gives us that divider, that green divider between the input and the actual keyboard. Okay. Speaking of the keyboard, hop down here, we're going to say pin-keyboard, okay? So we have three elements inside the pin screen, okay? We're going to be using CSS Flexbox later on to ensure that these are stacked on top of one another, and they've also got a nice gap between them. So we're going to be using Flexbox for the outside, and for the keyboard itself, we'll finish the HTML markup, but we're going to be using CSS Grid to get the 3x3 or 3x4 row of keys there. Okay, so let's just finish off the keyboard here. We're going to say button with a type of button, and this here represents a single key. So for example, the number 1, okay, in the top left corner. We'll say a class of pin-keyboard-key and give it a value of 1. Save this, go inside the browser, refresh, and we get something like this, okay? As we can see, we have the input, horizontal rule, and the single button. Let's duplicate the button about 9 more times or 8 more times. We'll say 1, 2, so that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's all of the 1 to 9. Then you have a few more, including, your clear button, your 0, and your enter. So we'll say here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This one here is going to be the clear. Okay, we'll say clear for now. I'll come back to it, put the icon in there. This is going to be 0. This is going to be submit. Okay, save this, back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here. Let's get the icons in for the clear and the submit buttons. To achieve this, let's go back on the Ionicons website, go to the icon section, and we can search for the icon called close. We're going to be using the close outline icon. We'll copy this here by clicking on it, then going back inside here, index.html, we're going to replace the clear with the icon markup, just like this, copied from the library's website. Okay, let's do the same thing for the submit button. For this one here, we're going to be using the icon, which is called arrow forward circle outline. Let's type in arrow just like this. It's this one right here. So arrow forward circle outline, copy it once again, back inside here, paste it inside there, save this, back in the browser, refresh, and we get this here. So we are almost done with the HTML markup. The last thing to do is to give the special buttons, the clear and the next or the submit button, we need to give them special classes to identify them inside the JavaScript later on. So going back inside here, we're going to say class of pin keyboard key for the close or the clear button, but also pin keyboard key dash dash clear. Okay, let's copy this class name, press space on the submit button and say dash dash enter or submit, right? We'll do enter for now. Save this, back in the browser, same result, but of course we have those classes on those two buttons there for the JavaScript later on. So we are done with the HTML markup. This is all we need to then style it to make it look like this. Okay, so let's do that now. Let's go inside the style.css and we're going to begin by targeting the pin-screen class. Let's give this a display of flex like I mentioned earlier, and also a flex direction of column. This way you have a single column with 3 elements stacked on top of one another. Okay, let's give this a box sizing of border box and a padding of 16 pixels. Okay, we're going to combine this with a border radius of 8 pixels and a gap also of 16 pixels. You want to make sure that the padding and the gap are the same value. That way the white space looks consistent around the whole pin view. Okay, let's also give this a set width of 300 pixels and a background of white. Okay, just like this. Save this, go back in the browser. Let's have a look here and we get this right here. As we can see, if we inspect this, we have the green padding around the edges. We have in the purple there, we have the 16 pixel gap between the input, the horizontal rule or the divider, and the keyboard itself. So 3 things there, okay? You've also got, of course, the border radius and the background color and so on. But we're almost there with the CSS. We now need to target each of the 3 sections individually. So back inside here, we're going to target the pin-value input field. So this right here refers to the main input at the top, okay? To make it a little bit easier to style, let's give this a default value right here of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, save this back in the browser, and on a refresh, we get, those 4 dots, okay? Back inside the CSS now, for the pin value, outline of none, border of none, background of transparent. The idea here is to ensure that the pin value blends in with the background. It's more as a display thing than it would be for the user to manually input. So you're also going to have to go back and make it read only as well. I forgot about that. My apologies there. Let's make this read only. Save this back in the browser. Just confirm that everything's working okay. And it still is. The user can't actually edit it through the keyboard. So back inside here, we have the outline, border, and background. Okay. Also going to say a text align of center and a font size of 32 pixels. I'm gonna stop right here, go back in the browser, refresh, and we get this. Okay. So it's mostly done, but there are a few more things to change. Okay. One of them things is going to be the letter spacing. We'll say 4 pixels right there, save back in the browser, refresh, and we get a larger amount of space between each character. And that's actually all we need for the pin value class or rule set, okay? Let's move forward to the pin divider, this one right here. It's going to be very straightforward. Let's target pin-divider, give it a height of 1 pixel, just like this, and a width of 100%. We need some extra properties here to make our own custom HR tag because it's inside a flex box. So the width gets affected, okay? As you can see right now, it's actually no width or very little width per 1 pixel as an example, right? So we need to expand that out to 100%, as well as a border of none and a background of 009578. We can also remove the default margin because we have the gap doing this for us right up here. Save this back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here. Perfect, okay? We can now move forward to the pin keyboard, arguably the most important part of the pin login or the pin input, etc. So we'll say here, pin keyboard, okay? And for this, a display of grid, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be creating a 3x12 grid, okay? So we'll say here, grid template columns, repeat 3, 1FR. We don't need to say 3x4 or say there's going to be 12 cells. We're simply saying here, let's make a grid based on rows that have 3 elements inside of it. So 1, 2, 3. Then say each item has to fill up the same amount of space evenly. So of course, in the example, 1, 2, 3, each item takes up the same amount of space. So that matches with what the design looks like, okay? Now again, no need to say 3x4 or 12 cells because this just means an infinite number of rows. They all need to have this rule, 3 evenly spaced cells. It just happens to be 12 because we have a total of 12 buttons here, okay? Hope that makes sense. So we have the grid defined. We can now just say a gap of 16 pixels, again, matching this value right up here in the container. Save this back in the browser, refresh, and we get this right here, okay? Inspect this up. You can see you have the purple gap once again, and those, 3 evenly spaced cells. Back inside here now, we can target the pin keyboard key. Okay, for each individual key, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. For these ones, we're going to say a display of flex, okay? And align items of center and justify content of center. These 3 properties are going to ensure that the number inside of it or the icon inside of it is going to be centered vertically and horizontally. Let's also give this a height of 48 pixels and a cursor of pointer. All right, a font family of Lexend should do with a fallback to sans serif and a font size of 22 pixels. Save this back in the browser, refresh here, and we get something like this. We're almost there, all right? Back in here now, we're going to also give this a color or a foreground color of 555, giving us a medium gray, a background of white to blend into the background. You could also use transparent if you like here because, of course, this background is white in the container. And we're also going to say here a border of 2 pixel solid, and then we'll use EE here as the border color and a border radius of 4 pixels, just like this. Save this back in here, refresh, and we get something like this, okay? Great, so now, last thing to do here is going to be to have an effect when the user clicks on the button to, of course, convey to them that they actually did something. So for this one, we're going to go back in here and just simply say pin keyboard key, then say :active. So when it's active or when the user's pressing on it, we're going to change the background to be, once again, that EE color. Okay, save this back in the browser, refresh, click on the buttons and they change color, to give that feedback to the user. So we're done with the HTML and the CSS. Let's move on now to the JavaScript, probably the easiest part of this input field, all right? Now, how's it going to work? Well, we're going to have a function which initializes a pin screen or a pin input, okay? This function is going to take in a element through a selector, so more on that shortly, not too hard. And it's also going to give you a way to react to when the user presses enter on the actual screen. Okay, so we'll say here, const init pin screen, so initialize pin screen, a function, like I said, which takes in a selector, a CSS selector, right? Then an on enter, okay? Let's leave this empty for now, go down here, and we'll say init pin screen for the selector, and we're going to say main pin screen, okay? Then say on enter, we're going to grab onto the pin, okay? Then we're going to say simply just console.log entered pin, and then provide that pin just like this, okay? Using the backticks near the 1 on your keyboard for template strings, allowing us to pass in the pin value. So this here looks a little bit confusing if you're not used to this syntax, but essentially we're saying to initialize the pin screen for this element. When the user presses enter, we're going to grab the entered pin and log it out to the console. You can do whatever you want inside here. For example, you can make an API request, etc. But this is the simplest form, okay? We're yet to implement this function and this behavior, but this is the usage, right? Now, where does this come from? Main pin screen? Well, it's a hash, meaning an ID. So going back inside here, let's say pin screen, ID of main pin screen, giving a unique identifier to this particular pin screen. You might have multiple, right? Which is why we have the initializer, okay? Now, how's it gonna work? Well, firstly, we're gonna grab onto the container. We're gonna say const container equal to, then we'll say document.query selector, and we'll say selector. Let's console.log what the container is. Save this back in the browser, refresh. We've called initialize pin screen, and we get this as the container variable in JavaScript, okay? Referring to this pin screen. Now, from the container, we need access to the input field to update the value when the user clicks on the buttons. We'll say const input equal to container. So scoping to the container itself, this particular container. Container.query selector, we're going to go onto the pin-value class. Same thing for the keys, okay? We're going to say const keys equal to query selector all, okay? So grab all the keys using the class name pin keyboard-key. Let's verify this works by logging out the input and the keys. Save this back in the browser, refresh, we get the input right here, okay, that password field. Then you have a node list of all the input keys, just like this, right? So we can now add event listeners to these to say, look, when they get clicked on, let's update the value of the pin, right? So back in here, how's this gonna look? Well, first, we're gonna say for const key of keys. So for every single key, we'll say key.addEvent listener, okay? When the key gets clicked on, we're going to run this function. What's the function going to do? Well, it's going to find out what value should be used to be appended to the key. Okay, this is done by having a look at the actual HTML inside your button. It might be smarter and more robust to use a data attribute, for example, data value equal to 2. But to keep it simple, let's just use the value provided inside the button. So for this, we're going to say const value equal to key.innerHTML, or let's use text content, okay, .trim. Let's log out the value, okay? Save back in the browser, refresh, click on 3, and we get 3, 5, 6, 7, etc. Clicking on these clear and the submit gives you nothing. We'll fix that later on, but these main numbers are working, okay? So now we simply grab that value and then we append it to whatever's inside the input right now. So we'll say input.value plus equals value. Of course, input referring to the main pin at the top right here. Refresh, we have these 4 existing values. Okay, so we may want to remove that default 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So I'll get rid of that in the HTML. Okay, save back in here, refresh, press 1, and we get 1 right there. 2, 4, 6, 8, 7, etc. To prove this works, I'll inspect the password field, make it a text field, and we get the numbers. Okay, great, that's working. Let's now implement both the clear and the submit buttons. Now for this one, we're going to begin by simply making a function within here called clear, okay? This function is going to grab the input and then say .value is equal to nothing. It's going to clear out the input field when called. We're going to need this for the clear button, right? So this event listener is going to look a little bit different now. It's now going to say if key.classList.contains, okay? If the key that was clicked on contains the pin keyboard key clear class, so this one right here, we'll paste that in there, then we know that this was the clear key, which is why we added in those classes before. We'll simply call the clear function and then return out. Actually, we cannot return out. Let's just backspace that. We can instead use an else if. Up to you really, but I'll use an else if here for the next part of this. So look, let's just take a step back here. If your key is the clear key, we're going to simply use clear. Okay? Otherwise, else if, right? Otherwise, if the class list contains the enter class, it's the enter key. Therefore, we're going to submit the value. How is this going to look? Well, first, if the user presses the enter key, right, we first need to check, okay, is there actually a value? So grab the current value from the input field, input.value, okay? We can now say and. This just says, look, is there a value? If so, then move forward to the next part of this line of code, okay? We'll say and on enter, okay? And on enter and provide input.value. What's happening here? We're saying, look, if the user presses the enter key and there is a value in the input field and on enter was provided down here when you initialize, because you can, for example, not provide it like this, right? That's possible. So if it's provided and we simply call on enter, this function here that gets passed in gets called and we pass the value to the pin parameter. Hope that makes sense, okay? It's basically calling the function which you pass in when you initialize, okay? Else, if it's not the clear and it's not the enter key, it means it is the simple numeric value to append to the top part. Save this back in the browser here, refresh, press 1, 2, 4, 5, okay? Go to the console, press enter, and we get nothing. That's very interesting. Let's figure out why. Okay, my issue was the fact I used a dot character before these class names. So getting rid of this is going to solve the problem. I'm sure some of you may have realized this a couple of minutes ago. I apologize. But yeah, we're in the context of a class list. Therefore, we don't need to have the dot character before the class name. Save this back in the browser. Try again. We'll say 2541, press enter, we get entered pin 2541. We can clear it and it goes away, and these still work. Okay, so we're almost there, all right? The last thing to do is to provide it with a way to clear the input field. So let's just say you're down here, right? You've got access to the pin, okay? You will still want a way potentially to then say, okay, I'm now done with the pin, therefore we can clear it. So if you want that functionality, you can simply provide this function to the parent, to this right here. How do we do that? Well, on enter, you can provide the pin or the value as well as the clear function like this. So you're simply passing that through instead of calling it, right? You're passing it through. Then this can grab onto the function in the second argument and you can say clear, just like that. And you can make this a conditional. For example, if the pin was incorrect, you may want to not clear it or whatever it might be, I don't know. But you have that option there for you. Save this back in the browser, refresh, 1, 2, 3, 4, press enter, we get this and it gets cleared because of course we called that function right there. And that is how to build your own pin input using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. If this video helped you out, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to Decode, and here is another video.